Welcome everyone. Some more fresh thoughts for you to think on and about, where you may just find a better way of thinking. Okay, today we'll delve into your workbench. Your workbench is a thinking workspace, right on the line between your thinking and you thinking. Now, the best image to create of your workbench is an old solid wooden workbench with shelving attached at the back of it, a solid wooden chair, and a light above it. This is where you come to face your thinking and all the thoughts you just think with, after just taking them on as you thinking. This workbench is the manifestation of you thinking, I want to face myself, and all the thoughts that try to think for me and to get me to think them, and all the thoughts I hide from, and all the thoughts I hide away. This is the space that will help you learn that you can think through every thought you have and find out whether they are a true thought of you or one of your thoughts that you just picked up and used to think with. Now, the idea is to think about sitting down at this workbench and to start to think into the thoughts you try to avoid thinking about. Now, I need to point out that this workbench, even the smallest thing you think about at this workbench, is a big thing for you, as it is you truly thinking. And any thought, no matter how small, thought by the true you will bring about a growth in you, of you, and will help you to continue to grow as you look to grow. Now remember, the very thought of you creating your workbench is the thought of you, and the growth of you, and the growth of you thinking, the same as you growing from actually creating the image of your workbench. Now, you may have some trepidation, some fear at the thought of sitting down at that workbench. But again, that is fine, as you are actually thinking of sitting down at your workbench. So again, you are thinking, and there is more growth of you and of you thinking. It does not matter how many times you think of sitting down at your workbench, as again, that is a thought of you each time, and a growth of you each time, as you are actually thinking about sitting down at your workbench. It is a thought you are having for you and is helping grow you to a point where you will decide to sit down at your workbench. Okay, so when you do decide to go and sit down at your workbench, just sit there and think, hey, I made it to the chair. I'm sitting down at my workbench. Again, another thought of you, and again, more growth of you, and more growth of you thinking. So, now that you are sitting there, just take in where you are. You are sitting at your workbench. You have your shelves in front of you. You have a nice comfortable light above you. And this is a thinking workspace of you. Now, if you decide, okay, that's enough of that, and decide to get up and leave, that is fine. Again, a thought of you and further growth of you. You sat at your workbench. Awesome. Now, you may not sit at your workbench for a while after that. You keep looking at the chair, but you just want to take a bit more time before sitting down again. And that is not a problem. Look how far you have come. You have thought to create a workbench. You have created a workbench. You have thought to sit down at your workbench, and you have already thought through a number of thoughts to make all that happen and continued to grow you as you went along. It is not about how or when it is done. It is about you thinking how and when you think how and when things are done. This is the true growth of you, the thinking to what you do, not specifically what you do. Grow how you think, and what you think to do becomes easier and easier. Okay, so you have grown how you think to the point where you are comfortable sitting at your workbench. So now what you want to do is to sit and think on and about all the thoughts that you hide and hide from. Do not think of them specifically or how many there are. Just notice that they are there, and just notice at this workbench that you are on the line between your thinking and you thinking, and that you can think into your thinking with you thinking, and the workbench is your safe place of thinking in between. Your workbench allows you to see all the thoughts of your thinking without having to be in the thoughts of your thinking. Now, what you do now is see all your thoughts as jars, because in effect that is what you have done with all the thoughts you hide from and hide away. You basically put them in a jar and screw the lid down tight on them and throw them into the darkest place you can find. So the next thing for you to think on and about is to pick a thought in a jar. Now, just pick an easy thought, a thought you semi-hide from, one that you are sort of okay with and sort of not okay with, one you can sort of look at but want to look away. And put that jar up on one of your shelves and just look at it. It cannot do anything to you. It is in the jar you put it in, but now it is on your shelf, out of the dark, and really not that scary, just sitting there. And just think, I just put a thought I have been hiding from on the shelf of my workbench. Again, more growth of you and you thinking. What you need to remember now is you control your workbench and your jars, all the jars in the dark, and the jars on the shelf, and the jars on your workbench. And at any time, you can do anything with your workbench and your jars. You can start, you can stop, you can put it back on the shelf, or you can leave it on the workbench. It is your space and time and you thinking. Another important thing to remember at your workbench is no one can hear your thoughts here. All the thoughts you have hidden away and are worried about, no one can hear them. So do not be worried by listening to those thoughts, as only you can hear them. There is only you and you thinking. There is no one else to judge your thoughts, so you are able to clearly think on and about those thoughts and find what you truly think about them. You are able to openly think about them and the whole of the thought, so you can see how the whole thought was made up. Okay, so back to that jar sitting on the shelf that you came from not wanting to think about, to creating a workbench, to sitting at your workbench, to thinking about your jars, to actually putting a jar of thought on your shelf. So you may have gotten up from your workbench and gone past it a couple of times, seeing that jar sitting on the shelf, getting more comfortable with the thought in the jar. You might even have gone and sat down a few times and looked at it and thought about it, and this is good. The further growth of you and the further growth of you thinking. So the day will come when you think to sit at your workbench and look at your jar and think, I think it is time I put that jar on the workbench. So you put that jar on the workbench and you just look at that jar. You may even think, hey, my jar is on the workbench, my actual workspace, where I start to work on my thought. And as you think that thought, you may even notice the growth of you a little bit. Now, you may keep looking at that jar. You may even pick the jar up. You may even think to take the lid off. You may even put your hand on the lid. Then you may put the jar back down on the workbench. Then you may even put the jar back on the shelf. Then you may even get up from your workbench. Then you may go past your workbench a couple of times. Then you may sit back down at your workbench and put the jar back on the workbench. And every thought of that you had was you thinking and you growing, and now you are back to the jar on the workbench. So, whether you open the jar when you first put the jar on the workbench, or whether you are thinking of doing it now, it was all a part of you thinking. It was all part of you growing, not you hiding away. So, back to the jar and onto the opening of the jar. You see the jar sitting there. You have been thinking about that jar and that thought within the jar, and you are interested to see just how well your new growth of thinking will think on the actual thought in that jar. A lot more intrigued now than fear after learning so much about you thinking already from just learning to face your thoughts. So you proceed, as you have done with everything so far, one thought at a time. You take the lid off of the jar and you put it on the workbench. And you may just look at that jar for a bit. Then you may even look in the jar for a bit and have a closer look at that thought. You may even then tip that thought out onto your workbench and have a bit more of a look at that thought. Then you might just try pulling that thought apart a little bit and see how that thought works. Then you may just leave it on your workbench and come back some other time. Or you may even put that thought back in the jar, put the lid on, and put the jar back on the shelf and come back another time. Every way is the right way, as long as it is you thinking to do it. Now, as you progress, you will find you have more jars on your shelf, some more jars on your workbench, and maybe some thoughts sitting on the workbench that you pulled apart to varying degrees. You may find you work out a thought as far as you can and then just leave it for the time being and move on to another thought. And you find, as you break that thought down, you will find new information in that thought that will help you further break down the thought you worked as far as you could and moved on from, and so on and so forth. The more you pull apart thoughts, the more information from other thoughts will help you further pull apart thoughts that you could only pull apart so far. The more you think and the more you grow, and the more you grow you thinking, the easier and more efficiently you will think through and break down all the thoughts you have hidden away and that you were hiding from, until you will think free of them and freely think for you. Your workbench is where the why of you thinking comes out, and where you think to question exactly why those thoughts are there. Why is the thought there? Why did I hide that thought? Why did I hide from that thought? not just accepting that they are there. What do I think about that thought? Why did I think to think that thought? Is that truly my thought? This is where you thinking starts to chase all the thoughts that tried to chase you, and start to see that they are just thoughts and do not really hold a power over me like I thought they did, once I actually start to think what I think about those thoughts. Not that they are just there, but think, what are they doing there? You can block your thoughts as much as you like, but they will always try to think, and you will always have to think to block them. Or you can think to think. If those thoughts need to be there, and start to pull apart why they are there, and if they should be kept or changed or removed, and then thinking the best way to do that. Do not be too afraid of your thoughts, as they are your thoughts, and you have just forgotten that you put them there and how you put them there. And that is what you are thinking on and about. Okay, they are my thoughts in the sense that I put them there, but why did I put them there? And do they need to be there anymore? You thinking is you thinking, not thinking what thoughts to think with, not thinking what thought to insert here.